When wildlife photographer Mike Donovan heard a faint cry cutting through the howling Montana blizzard, he assumed it was just the wind playing tricks on him. Whiteout conditions had turned Evergreen National Forest into a frozen labyrinth, and he was desperate to find shelter. Instead, he stumbled upon a sight so unexpected, so contrary to everything wildlife experts believed, that it would forever transform our understanding of animal behavior. The encounter between a desperate man, a dying bear cub, and its powerful mother wasn't just an anomaly. It was a moment that would revolutionize wildlife conservation, challenge scientific dogma, and ultimately redefine the boundary between human and animal worlds. As the blizzard raged on, none of them could have known that this chance meeting would spark a movement that would save countless lives, both human and wild, and reveal intelligence in the animal kingdom that science had refused to see. The digital thermometer on Mike's specialized outdoor watch blinked an alarming 25 degrees Celsius as he struggled to maintain his footing on the snow-covered trail. An unexpected January thaw, followed by a devastating blizzard, had created the perfect storm, literally. The weather forecast had predicted clear skies when he'd begun his 3-day photography expedition into the remote corners of Evergreen National Forest, hoping to capture images of wildlife adapting to the harsh winter conditions. Now, those same conditions threatened his survival. Mike had spent 15 years photographing wild animals across 6 continents, earning international acclaim for his intimate portraits of predators in their natural habitats. His work had appeared in prestigious nature magazines and won awards for bringing attention to endangered species. But none of his experience had prepared him for the whiteout conditions that had descended without warning, transforming a routine photography expedition into a fight for survival. The wind cut through his thermal gear like icy knives, and his emergency GPS showed his cabin shelter still 2 miles away, an almost impossible distance in these conditions. His fingers, despite the high-tech gloves, had begun to lose feeling. Hypothermia was a real threat now. Mike knew the statistics all too well. In temperatures this extreme, an unprepared person could succumb in less than an hour. Even with his specialized gear, the clock was ticking. Then he heard it, a sound so out of place it momentarily distracted him from his own predicament. A high-pitched wail, almost like an infant's cry, cut through the howling wind. Mike paused, turning his head to triangulate the source. Wildlife instincts kicked in, overriding his self-preservation. That sound, it wasn't the wind, it was alive, it was suffering. Adjusting his course toward the sound, Mike trudged through knee-deep snow, each step requiring monumental effort. The crying grew louder, more desperate, pulling him forward like an invisible thread. As he rounded a massive pine tree, its branches heavy with snow, the source of the sound came into view, and Mike froze in disbelief. There, half buried in a snowdrift, lay a black bear cub, no more than a few months old. Its tiny body trembled violently, its cries growing weaker by the second. Mike's mind raced with confusion. Black bears should be deep in hibernation this time of year. Mother and cubs nestled safely in their den until spring. The presence of this cub alone in the deadly cold defied everything he knew about bear behavior. Instinct told Mike to keep his distance. A cub alone might mean a mother bear nearby, and nothing in nature is more dangerous than a mother bear protecting her young. He scanned the surroundings, looking for signs of the mother, but saw only swirling snow in every direction. The cub's cries had weakened to pitiful whimpers, its small body shivering uncontrollably. "This isn't possible," Mike whispered, his breath crystallizing instantly in the frigid air. The cub should be hibernating with its mother, not alone in a snowdrift. Something had gone terribly wrong. Perhaps the January thaw had disrupted the hibernation cycle, confused the bears, driven them from their den before the sudden return of deadly winter conditions. Mike faced an impossible choice: Wildlife photography ethics were clear: never interfere with nature's processes, no matter how harsh. His role was to document, not intervene. Yet as the cub's movements grew more feeble, another ethic pulled at him: basic compassion. Without help, the cub would certainly die within minutes. Decision made, Mike dropped his heavy photography pack and moved carefully toward the cub. Its eyes were barely open, crusted with ice, its black fur dusted white with snow. Up close, Mike could see the cub was severely hypothermic, its breathing shallow and irregular. Using his camera strap, he fashioned a makeshift harness for his emergency thermal blanket, creating a small tent over the cub to trap its body heat. "Hang on, little one," he murmured, working quickly to clear snow away from the cub's body. His extensive experience with wildlife told him this cub was no more than 3 months old, born during hibernation, now facing a death it couldn't comprehend. As Mike worked, he kept scanning the surroundings, knowing that intervening with a cub could make him the target of maternal fury if the mother appeared. The cub responded to the warmth, its cries strengthening slightly. Encouraged, Mike removed one of his inner insulation layers, a dangerous sacrifice in these temperatures, and wrapped it gently around the trembling animal. Conservation rules prohibited interfering with wildlife, but Mike couldn't stand by and watch the cub die. This wasn't natural selection at work. Human-caused climate disruption had likely created this situation in the first place. As he worked, a sound stopped him cold, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate the very air around him. Mike's heart nearly stopped. He knew that sound. Every wildlife photographer who had ever worked with bears recognized the warning of an approaching mother. Slowly, moving only his eyes, Mike looked up. There, not 20 feet away, stood one of the largest female black bears he had ever seen. Her winter coat was thick and frosted with snow, her breath coming in great steaming clouds. Her eyes, fixed directly on Mike, showed no confusion, no hibernation grogginess, only fierce, focused intelligence. She had one objective: her cub. Mike remained absolutely still, knowing any sudden movement could trigger an attack. His camera, which might have captured this extraordinary winter appearance, lay useless in his discarded pack several feet away. Now it was about survival, not documentation. The mother bear approached with deliberate steps, each massive paw creating deep impressions in the snow. Mike had documented hundreds of bear encounters over his career, but always from a safe distance or protected position. Now, with nothing between him and half a ton of maternal instinct, he prepared for the worst, knowing he could never outrun her in the deep snow. What happened next defied everything Mike thought he knew about wild bear behavior. Instead of charging, the mother bear approached cautiously, her attention divided between Mike and her struggling cub. When she was less than 10 feet away, close, enough for Mike to see the ice crystals forming on her fur, she stopped. Her eyes, deep brown and startlingly intelligent, studied him with what seemed impossible to interpret as anything other than calculation. For nearly a full minute, neither moved. The only sounds were the howling wind, the cub's weakening whimpers, and the thundering of Mike's heart in his own ears. Then, with deliberate slowness, the mother bear did something that would soon challenge wildlife science around the world. She lowered her head in what appeared to be a gesture of non-aggression. Still barely breathing, Mike watched as she approached her cub, gently nuzzling the thermal blanket he had placed. Then, to his utter astonishment, she looked directly at him again, took 2 steps back, and waited, as if inviting his continued assistance. "Impossible," Mike whispered. Every instinct honed through years in the wild told him to retreat, to give the mother space to care for her cub. Yet, her behavior suggested something else entirely. In that moment, facing death in the swirling snow, Mike made a decision that would soon rock the foundations of wildlife biology. He chose to trust what his eyes were telling him rather than what science claimed was impossible. With excruciatingly slow movements, Mike returned to the cub, aware of the mother bear's eyes tracking his every move. He continued clearing snow, creating a small sheltered hollow and gently massaging the cub's limbs to stimulate circulation. The mother watched, occasionally making soft vocalizations to her cub, but never showing aggression toward Mike. "This goes against everything we know about bear behavior," Mike said aloud, not caring that his only audience was the wind and two bears. As a photographer who had documented wildlife behavior for years, he recognized the significance of what was happening. Mother bears were supposed to be exclusively aggressive toward humans near their cubs. It was wildlife management gospel. Yet here was this mother, seemingly accepting his help, perhaps even recognizing his attempt to save her cub's life. For nearly 40 minutes, as the blizzard raged around them, Mike worked alongside the mother bear in an improvised partnership that defied natural history. He used his body heat and emergency supplies to warm the cub while the mother provided comfort through touch and sound. Gradually, the cub's breathing strengthened, its cries becoming more vigorous. When the cub finally managed to stand on shaky legs, Mike felt tears freezing on his cheeks. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The mother gently nudged her cub, encouraging it to move, then turned once more to Mike. Their eyes met across the evolutionary divide, and in that moment, Mike would later insist, something profound passed between them, a recognition that transcended species. Then, with her cub now mobile, the mother bear gently shepherded it away into the swirling snow, disappearing into the white void as mysteriously as she had appeared. Mike remained kneeling in the snow, shivering violently from cold and adrenaline, struggling to process what he had witnessed. By all rights, he should be dead or severely mauled. Instead, he had participated in an interspecies cooperation that shouldn't have been possible. The journey back to his cabin was a blur of cold and confusion. Once inside, with the wood stove blazing and feeling returning painfully to his extremities, Mike reviewed the footage from the small action camera attached to his parka. The battery had been nearly depleted by the cold, but it had captured enough indisputable evidence of behavior that would challenge everything wildlife biologists thought they knew about bear cognition and decision-making. That night, as the blizzard finally subsided, Mike made notes with trembling hands, trying to document every detail while it remained fresh in his mind. He knew he had witnessed something extraordinary. Not just a mother bear out of hibernation in deadly winter conditions, but a level of cognitive processing and interspecies cooperation that current science deemed impossible. 2 days later, having finally regained cellular service, Mike made a call that would change his life and the future of wildlife conservation. Dr. Elena Vasquez, lead wildlife behaviorist at Northridge Research Center, listened in stunned silence as Mike described his encounter. "Send me everything," she said finally, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "Every second of footage, every note. If what you're describing is accurate, it challenges our entire understanding of ursine cognition." Within a week, the footage had been authenticated by multiple experts, confirming it showed no signs of manipulation or staging. The scientific community's initial skepticism quickly gave way to intense interest. How had this mother bear broken hibernation? How had she assessed Mike as non-threatening despite his proximity to her cub? Most importantly, how had she appeared to understand and accept his assistance? Mike found himself at the center of a scientific whirlwind. The story spread rapidly through academic circles, with heated debates about animal consciousness and cognition. The footage, particularly the moment when the mother bear appeared to deliberately step back and allow Mike to help, became the subject of frame-by-frame analysis at leading wildlife research institutes. Dr. Vasquez organized the First major conference call, bringing together bear experts from 3 continents. "What we're seeing here," she explained as they reviewed Mike's footage, "is not just anomalous behavior. This appears to be genuine problem-solving and interspecies cooperation initiated by the bear." She assessed the situation, recognized the human's helpful intent, and made a decision that contradicts everything we thought we knew about bear behavior in proximity to cubs. The initial paper, published by Dr. Vasquez and co-authored by Mike, sent shockwaves through the wildlife biology community. Titled "Cooperative Cognition in Ursus Americanus, Evidence for Complex Decision-Making," it suggested that bears possessed far greater cognitive abilities than previously recognized, including the capacity to override instinctual aggression when beneficial to offspring survival. Critics initially dismissed the encounter as a one-time anomaly, perhaps the result of a bear with previous human contact or unusual environmental factors. But then, something unexpected happened. Similar reports began emerging from across North America. A forest ranger in Oregon documented a black bear guiding lost hikers away from her cubs rather than attacking. Wildlife cameras in Colorado captured footage of a mother bear apparently using stones to break ice on a frozen pond so her cubs could drink. It seemed that once researchers knew what to look for, evidence of complex bear cognition appeared everywhere. Each new documented case strengthened the revolutionary hypothesis that had begun with Mike's encounter in the blizzard. 6 months after the encounter, Mike returned to Evergreen National Forest with Dr. Vasquez and a research team equipped with the latest in wildlife tracking technology. Their mission: to locate the mother bear and her cub, now equipped with distinctive identifying markers from Mike's footage. Using thermal imaging drones and tracking experts, they searched the areas where black bears typically establish territories. On the 3rd day, they found them. The cub had grown considerably, healthy and active despite its near-death experience. The mother showed no signs of the ordeal affecting her ability to provide care. For 2 weeks, the team observed from a respectful distance, documenting behaviors that repeatedly demonstrated problem-solving abilities previously thought impossible for bears. "She recognizes us," Dr. Vasquez noted with amazement on the 5th day of observation. "Watch how she positions herself, always keeping the cub within sight of our observation post, but never approaching or retreating. She's acknowledging our presence while establishing boundaries." The research team nicknamed the bear Sophia, from the Greek word for wisdom, though they were careful to avoid anthropomorphizing in their official documentation. Their findings, published in leading scientific journals, sparked a revolution in wildlife management practices across North America. Traditional approaches had treated bears as instinct-driven animals, dangerous and unpredictable around humans. The new evidence suggested something far more complex. Bears capable of nuanced decision-making, contextual assessment, and even cooperative behavior when circumstances warranted. This didn't make them less dangerous, the researchers emphasized, but it did make them worthy of a more sophisticated approach to conservation and management. 2 years after Mike's encounter in the blizzard, wildlife agencies across the continent had completely revamped their bear management protocols. The old approach of treating bears as simple threats to be controlled gave way to more nuanced policies that recognized their complex behaviors and cognitive capacities. Ranger training now included modules on bear cognition and communication, teaching techniques to assess bear behavior beyond simple aggression metrics. Mike's own career transformed completely. His photography now focused exclusively on documenting examples of complex decision-making in bears and other predator species. With new observation techniques and specialized camera systems, he built a collection of evidence that continued challenging traditional scientific assumptions. The most significant changes happened in conservation law. States with significant bear populations began passing what became known as cognitive recognition statutes, acknowledging that large predators possessed complex emotional and cognitive abilities that warranted special protection. Penalties for poaching increased dramatically. Habitat protection expanded, creating connected corridors that respected bears' territorial intelligence. Public attitudes shifted even more remarkably. Communities near bear habitats developed new educational programs that taught children about animal cognition and emotional intelligence. Tourist behaviors in national parks transformed as people began viewing bears with respect rather than fear or casual curiosity. The scientific ripples spread beyond wildlife biology. Neurologists studied bear brain patterns, looking for evidence of the decision-making processes Mike had witnessed. Cognitive scientists developed revolutionary theories about the evolution of problem-solving abilities across species. Philosophers engaged in heated debates about the nature of consciousness in non-human species. 5 years after that fateful day in the blizzard, Mike stood before a packed auditorium at the Global Wildlife Conservation Summit. As he prepared to present his latest research, he reflected on how one bear's actions had transformed not just his life, but the entire field of wildlife science. What began as a desperate moment in a snowstorm, Mike told the audience, has evolved into a complete reimagining of our relationship with wild animals. We've documented over 300 cases of bears making complex decisions that prioritize long-term survival over immediate instinct. We've recorded dozens of instances where bears demonstrated what can only be described as calculated restraint when encountering humans, assessing the situation rather than responding with automatic aggression. The summit featured groundbreaking new protection initiatives, including the International Bear Corridor Project, which had secured funding to connect fragmented bear habitats across unprecedented distances. Conservation efforts had experienced an unprecedented surge in both funding and public support. The story of Mike and the bears had become a symbol of nature's hidden complexity. Perhaps most surprisingly, Mike continued, this discovery has influenced fields far removed from wildlife biology. Artificial intelligence researchers now study bear decision-making processes to develop more adaptable AI systems. Medical researchers explore new approaches to understanding intuitive decision-making. Even business schools use our case studies to teach lessons about challenging established paradigms and the importance of observation over assumption. The original footage had been viewed by millions, displayed in museums and studied in classrooms worldwide. More importantly, it had opened countless eyes to possibilities that science had previously dismissed. Children now grew up learning that the natural world was far more complex and conscious than humans had imagined. Sophia and her cub were never located again after our initial research period, Mike explained to the summit attendees. But their legacy lives on in every new discovery about animal consciousness, in every revised wildlife protection law, in every shifted perspective about humanity's relationship with nature. 7 years after the encounter, Mike found himself once again in Evergreen National Forest in winter. The climate had stabilized somewhat thanks to aggressive international action prompted partly by new understanding of how climate disruption affected wildlife cognition and behavior. This time, he wasn't alone. A group of young wildlife researchers accompanied him, eager to learn from the man whose discovery had reshaped their field. As they followed fresh bear tracks in the snow, unusual but no longer considered impossible. In winter, Mike shared the story that had changed everything. The students listened intently, their modern research equipment far more advanced than what he had used years ago. Their devices could now detect and analyze animal brain patterns in the wild, measure emotional responses, and document complex social interactions. all technology that existed because one bear had shown the world that animals were capable of so much more than humans had imagined. The most rewarding change for Mike was seeing how children now learned about wildlife. Gone were the simple predator-prey dynamics he had studied in his youth. Students now learned about animal emotions, cross-species cooperation, and the intricate web of consciousness that connected all living things. Sophia's act of trust had opened a door that could never be closed, leading to a deeper understanding of the natural world. Recent studies had documented thousands of cases of conscious decision-making in wildlife. Bears had been observed creating tools to access difficult food sources. Wolf packs had been recorded adjusting their hunting strategies based on the specific humans observing them. Each new discovery reinforced what Mike had witnessed that snowy morning. Nature operated not just on instinct and survival, but on choices that sometimes defied simple explanation. The scientific paper about Mike's encounter remained the most cited work in modern wildlife biology. But more importantly, it had inspired a generation of researchers to question their assumptions and look deeper into the mysteries of animal consciousness. As Mike and his students set up their observation equipment in a new research blind, a familiar sound echoed through the trees. A bear's low rumble carried across the snow-covered landscape. The students fell silent, their instruments recording every detail. Mike raised his camera, just as he had done 7 years ago, ready to document whatever new discovery awaited them. The legacy of that morning in the snow lived on, not just in scientific papers and policy changes, but in how humans viewed their place in the natural world. One bear's choice to trust a human had revealed a profound truth. That intelligence and consciousness flowed through all living things in ways humans were only beginning to understand. Everything had indeed changed, and the world was richer for it. Like a mother bear's unexpected trust changed wildlife conservation forever, every encounter has the power to transform how we see the natural world. Be part of our growing community by subscribing and hitting the notification bell to receive weekly stories that challenge what we think we know about the extraordinary intelligence all around us. Mike Donovan's footage of the encounter spread through scientific circles like wildfire. What had begun as a desperate moment in a blizzard was rapidly transforming into the catalyst for a fundamental shift in wildlife biology. The video, particularly the 40-minute sequence showing cooperative behavior between human and mother bear, became the subject of intense analysis at research institutions worldwide. Dr. Elena Vasquez spent 18 hours straight examining the footage when it first reached her desk at Northridge Wildlife Research Center. As the leading expert on ursine behavior in North America, she had built her career on understanding bear cognitive patterns. Now, everything she thought she knew was being challenged. "Play it again," she instructed her research assistant, Olivia Chen, as they reviewed the moment where the mother bear deliberately stepped back, allowing Mike to continue helping the cub. "Look at her eye movement, her body positioning. This isn't reluctant tolerance, this is active cooperation." Olivia adjusted her glasses, scrutinizing the high-definition footage. "Do you think she understood he was helping? Actually comprehended his intentions?" "That's the question that's going to reshape our entire field," Elena replied, her voice quiet with the weight of the implication. "If she did, if a wild black bear correctly interpreted human intent and made a conscious decision to cooperate, then everything we've published about bear cognition is woefully incomplete." News of the footage reached Dr. Thomas Hayes, Director of Conservation at the Western Wildlife Federation, who immediately flew to Montana to meet with Mike. His initial skepticism dissolved upon viewing the unedited footage. "In 30 years of bear research, I've never seen anything like this," Hayes admitted, rubbing his tired eyes after reviewing the video for the third time in Mike's cabin. The wind howled outside, reminiscent of the blizzard that had brought about this extraordinary encounter. The mother's behavior shows clear signs of what we would call, in human terms, assessment and decision-making. Mike nodded, still processing the implications himself. She could have killed me in seconds. Instead, she seemed to understand I was trying to help her cub. Hayes leaned forward, his expression intense. That's why this is so revolutionary. Our entire wildlife management approach is built on the assumption that bears, particularly mothers with cubs, act on pure protective instinct, that they're incapable of nuanced assessment of human intentions. The footage was authenticated by 3 independent digital forensics experts, confirming it showed no signs of manipulation or staging. Wildlife biologists from universities across the globe requested access, forming an impromptu research consortium dedicated to analyzing every frame. Within 3 weeks of the encounter, Dr. Vasquez organized the first international conference call dedicated entirely to discussing its implications. Scientists from Japan, Norway, Canada, and Russia joined. American experts in a 6-hour marathon session, debating what the footage revealed about bear cognition. The implications extend far beyond this single incident, noted Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka from Hokkaido University, who had studied Asian black bears for decades. If North American black bears possess this level of cognitive flexibility, we must reconsider our understanding of all ursids, possibly all large predators. Late, the conference call marked the beginning of what would become known in scientific circles as the Donovan paradigm shift. The recognition that bears possessed far greater cognitive capacity than previously acknowledged by mainstream science. Dr. Vasquez and her team began drafting what would become a landmark paper, collaborating with Mike to document every aspect of the encounter. The paper, titled Evidence of Complex Decision-Making and Interspecies Cooperation in Ursus americanus, underwent rigorous peer review before being accepted by the prestigious journal Wildlife Cognition. The abstract laid out the revolutionary premise. This paper presents video documentation of a wild female black bear, Ursus americanus, engaged in apparent cooperative behavior with a human attempting to assist her hypothermic cub during winter conditions. The observed behavior suggests levels of cognitive assessment, intentionality, and cooperative capacity not previously attributed to ursids in scientific literature. We propose a significant re-evaluation of current models of ursine cognition is warranted. The paper's publication sent shockwaves through the wildlife biology community. Traditional explanations couldn't account for what the footage clearly showed. Some experts suggested the bear might have had previous positive human contact, though Mike's research into local bear populations found no evidence of this. Others proposed the mother bear was simply too physically compromised by unexpected winter activity to display normal aggressive behavior, a theory contradicted by her evident strength and mobility in the footage. Dr. Harold Myers, a renowned skeptic from Eastern Wildlife Institute, initially dismissed the encounter as an anomaly. One bear behaving abnormally doesn't revolutionize our understanding of the species, he argued during a contentious panel discussion at the North American Wildlife Conference. Dr. Vasquez countered with characteristic precision. Science advances by investigating anomalies, Dr. Myers. When observation contradicts theory, we don't dismiss the observation, we revisit the theory. The debate might have remained academic, if not for what happened next. As news of the encounter spread through wildlife research communities, reports of similar observations began emerging. It seemed that once researchers knew what to look for, evidence of complex bear cognition appeared with surprising frequency. Park Ranger Jim Cooper from Yellowstone submitted footage showing a mother black bear apparently creating a diversionary path to lead hikers away from her cubs rather than confronting them directly, a behavior suggesting understanding of human movement patterns and the capacity to formulate indirect protective strategies. Wildlife cameras in Olympic National Park captured a black bear apparently using a fallen log as a tool to reach beehives, demonstrating problem-solving abilities beyond what was documented in existing literature. Most compelling was footage from a wildlife rehabilitation center in Colorado, where a rescued adult bear appeared to deliberately bring food to an injured newcomer, behavior suggesting empathy and calculated assistance that contradicted established understanding of bear social structures. None of these observations alone matched the clear documentation and extraordinary circumstances of Mike's encounter, but collectively they suggested a pattern that could no longer be ignored. Bears were demonstrating cognitive abilities that existing science had failed to recognize or document. Meanwhile, Mike found himself thrust into an unfamiliar role, that of reluctant scientific revolutionary. Television crews from nature documentaries sought interviews, universities invited him to speak, conservation organizations courted him for fundraising campaigns. "I'm just a wildlife photographer," he protested during a particularly persistent phone call from a major network. "I happen to be there with a camera." "That's precisely why your footage is so valuable," the producer insisted. "You weren't conducting an experiment. You weren't looking for intelligent behavior. You were just documenting what happened naturally. That's what makes this evidence so compelling." Mike eventually agreed to a limited number of carefully selected interviews, determined to ensure the emphasis remained on the scientific significance rather than sensationalizing the encounter. He partnered with Dr. Vasquez for most appearances, letting her expert knowledge provide context for his first-hand experience. "What makes this encounter so revolutionary," Dr. Vasquez explained during a televised interview that would be viewed by millions, "is that it shows a wild bear making a calculated risk assessment in a crisis situation. The mother bear evaluated Mike's behavior, recognized his helpful intent despite his being human, and made a decision that contradicted what we've always believed about maternal bear behavior. That suggests a level of cognitive processing more sophisticated than anything documented in previous research." 3 months after the encounter, funding poured into bear cognition research. Universities that had previously dismissed such studies as fringe science now established dedicated research programs. Grant proposals that might once have been rejected as speculative received priority funding. Dr. Vasquez's research team expanded, developing new methodologies specifically designed to detect and document decision-making behaviors in wild bears. They deployed advanced camera systems in bear habitats across Montana, equipped with movement sensors and high-definition night vision capabilities. "We've been looking at bears through the wrong lens," she explained to her expanded research team during their first field deployment. "We've been so focused on studying their foraging patterns, denning behaviors, and reproductive cycles that we've missed evidence of complex cognition hiding in plain sight." The team established observation protocols specifically designed to capture evidence of problem-solving, tool use, communication, and cooperation among bears, behaviors that traditional research methodologies simply hadn't been designed to detect. 4 months into the study, their efforts yielded results that further challenged conventional understanding. Bears were observed creating sheltered sleeping areas with complex structures, suggesting planning beyond immediate need. They documented examples of bears apparently setting aside food resources for future use, behavior suggesting an understanding of time and delayed gratification not previously attributed to the species. Most striking was footage of bear social interactions that defied the solitary hunter stereotype. When resources were abundant, adult bears sometimes tolerated each other's presence in arrangements that suggested rudimentary social structures rather than mere coincidence. 6 months after his encounter in the blizzard, Mike joined Dr. Vasquez's team for a specialized expedition back to Evergreen National Forest. Their mission, to locate the specific mother bear and cub from the encounter, now recognizable from distinctive markings visible in the original footage. The expedition deployed state-of-the-art tracking technology, including thermal imaging drones capable of detecting bears even through dense forest canopy. Local ranger stations provided data on recent bear sightings and activity patterns. Mike brought his expertise as a wildlife tracker, having spent years following elusive predators across challenging terrains. For 2 weeks, they searched areas where a mother and cub might establish territory, focusing on regions with suitable food sources and limited human activity. The search proved challenging. The vast wilderness of Evergreen National Forest offered countless places for bears to remain hidden from human observation. On the 15th day, as the team was considering relocating their search area, a thermal imaging drone picked up a heat signature consistent with a bear and cub approximately 2 miles northwest of their base camp. The signature appeared in a remote valley near Cold Creek, an area rich in berry bushes and fish. Could be any bear and cub, cautioned Olivia, reviewing the drone footage on her tablet. The forest has dozens of mother-cub pairs. We need visual confirmation, Dr. Vasquez agreed. Mike, what do you think? Worth investigating. Mike studied the thermal imaging, noting the movement patterns. The way she's moving. Deliberate. Careful. It reminds me of her. Let's check it out. The team approached cautiously, using all their expertise to move quietly through the forest. They set up observation equipment at a respectful distance, deploying long-range cameras with powerful zoom capabilities to avoid disturbing the bears. As the morning sun filtered through the pine trees, they finally got visual confirmation. There, moving gracefully through a clearing, was unmistakably the same mother bear from Mike's footage, her distinctive chest marking clearly visible. The cub, now considerably larger and healthier, followed close behind, occasionally darting ahead to investigate interesting scents. "It's them," Mike whispered, emotion catching in his throat. Through his camera lens, he watched the bear that had changed everything, the animal that had made a decision that defied everything science thought it knew about her kind. For the next week, the research team observed the bear pair from a distance, documenting their behaviors and interactions. What they witnessed further confirmed the revolutionary hypothesis that had begun with the blizzard encounter. The mother bear demonstrated remarkable awareness of their observation posts, despite the team's careful concealment and distance. She appeared to adjust her movements to keep certain activities, particularly those involving her cub, partially obscured from direct observation. "She knows we're watching," Dr. Vasquez noted on the 3rd day. "Look at how she positions herself between the cub and our cameras when they're resting. That's not coincidence, that's calculated." On the 5th day of observation, the mother bear exhibited behavior that left even the skeptics on the research team stunned. While her cub napped in a sheltered area, she methodically gathered berries, placing them in a clearly defined pile on a flat rock surface. Rather than eating them immediately, as conventional understanding of opportunistic feeding behaviors would predict, she appeared to be creating a food cache for later consumption. "She's storing food," Olivia whispered, documenting the behavior with meticulous notes. "That suggests an understanding of future needs, planning beyond immediate hunger." Dr. Vasquez nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's not just the food storage that's significant, it's the systematic way she's doing it. There's intention in her movements, precision." The team nicknamed the bear Sophia, from the Greek word for wisdom. though they were careful to avoid anthropomorphizing in their official documentation. They referred to the cub as JB for January bear, acknowledging its unusual winter activity. On the final day of this initial observation period, Sophia provided one more piece of evidence that would feature prominently in subsequent research. Papers. As the team prepared to depart their observation blind, a small equipment case accidentally fell, creating a distinctive sound that carried across the clearing. Rather than reacting with alarm or aggression, as bear behavior models would predict, Sophia turned toward the sound, stood motionless for several seconds in apparent assessment, then deliberately led her cub in a wide arc that maintained distance from the research team while continuing their foraging activities. "That's not instinctive flight behavior," Dr. Vasquez said quietly, watching through binoculars. "That's a calculated response." She identified the source of the sound, assessed the threat level, and adjusted her behavior accordingly. She's not just reacting, she's thinking. The expedition's findings, combined with the original encounter footage and subsequent observations from other researchers, formed the basis for a comprehensive reassessment of bear cognition. The research team produced 3 peer-reviewed papers that would ultimately transform wildlife biology's understanding of predator intelligence. The first paper, published in the Journal of Mammalian Cognition, detailed the original blizzard encounter, providing frame-by-frame analysis of the mother bear's behaviors and the evidence for intentional cooperation with a human. The second paper, appearing in Behavioral Ecology, documented the follow-up observations of Sophia and her cub, highlighting examples of apparent planning, tool use, and calculated responses to potential threats. The third and most revolutionary paper, published in the prestigious journal Nature, proposed a new cognitive model for understanding bear intelligence, suggesting that ursids possessed neural capabilities for complex decision-making previously recognized only in marine mammals, great apes, and certain bird species. 9 months after Mike's encounter in the blizzard, the scientific consensus began shifting. Universities revised their wildlife biology curricula to include modules on predator cognition. Textbook publishers commissioned updates to sections on bear behavior. What had begun as a single anomalous observation had developed into a new field of study. Traditional wildlife management approaches came under scrutiny as the implications of bear cognitive capabilities spread through conservation circles. If bears possessed this level of intelligence and decision-making ability, conventional management practices based on predictable, instinct-driven behavior models required fundamental reconsideration. Dr. Thomas Hayes, leveraging his position as Conservation Director at the Western Wildlife Federation, organized the first National Bear Management Conference specifically focused on incorporating new cognitive understanding into wildlife policies. The conference, held in Denver, brought together wildlife managers, researchers, and policymakers from across North America. For decades, we've managed bear populations based on a model that assumed relatively simple responses to stimuli, Hayes explained in his opening address. We've treated them essentially as sophisticated automatons driven by hunger, reproduction, and self-preservation instincts. The evidence now suggests we've been profoundly underestimating their cognitive capabilities. The conference produced the groundbreaking Denver Protocol, a new framework for bear management that acknowledged their capacity for complex decision-making, problem-solving, and adaptability. The protocol recommended significant changes to everything from public safety advisories to habitat protection strategies. Mike, attending the conference as a special guest, found himself moved by how significantly his chance encounter had changed scientific understanding. During a panel discussion on the final day, he was invited to share his personal perspective on the experience, "I've photographed wildlife for 15 years, he told the audience of experts, feeling somewhat out of place among so many scientists. "In all that time, I thought I was documenting animals' behaviors and interactions. Now I realize I was catching glimpses of their thoughts, their decisions, their choices. We've been looking at them without truly seeing them." Following the conference, wildlife management agencies across North America began implementing revised bear encounter guidelines for park rangers, outdoor enthusiasts, and communities in bear country. The new approaches emphasized understanding contextual behavior rather than relying on simplistic risk assessments. Ranger training programs developed new modules teaching techniques for assessing bear behavior based on the emerging cognitive model. Rangers learned to distinguish between defensive posturing and genuine aggression, to recognize signs of assessment and decision-making in bear encounters, and to understand how human behavior might be interpreted by bears in various contexts. The Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife and Parks became the first agency to completely overhaul its bear management strategies, implementing what it called cognitive-aware conservation practices. Other states and Canadian provinces quickly followed, adopting similar approaches. Public education campaigns transformed as well. The old messaging focused on bears as dangerous, unpredictable threats that responded purely to instinct. New campaigns presented a more nuanced picture of intelligent animals capable of assessing situations and making decisions based on perceived threats or opportunities. "Bears aren't mindless eating machines," explained one popular new public service announcement developed for national parks. "They're intelligent animals making complex decisions. Understanding their thinking helps us coexist safely." As public perceptions shifted, reports of negative human-bear interactions began declining in regions implementing the new approaches. Communities near bear habitats developed more sophisticated measures for reducing attractants while creating respectful distance rather than implementing aggressive deterrents. 1 year after the blizzard encounter, Mike's original footage had been viewed by wildlife management professionals, researchers, and policymakers worldwide. The mother bear's decision to accept human assistance had catalyzed a fundamental shift in how humans perceived and interacted with these long misunderstood animals. Mike himself had transformed from wildlife photographer to advocate, though he maintained his commitment to documentation over activism. His photography now focused specifically on capturing evidence of cognitive behaviors in bears and other predators. With specialized equipment and new understanding of what to look for, his work provided an ever-growing body of evidence supporting the revolutionary cognitive model. During a spring photography expedition in Yellowstone, Mike captured a sequence that would become almost as famous as his original blizzard footage. A black bear apparently creating a tool from a broken branch to extract insects from a rotting log. The images showed clear intentionality in the bear's movements, methodical testing of the tool, and adaptations when initial attempts proved unsuccessful. "What we're seeing isn't just trial and error," Dr. Vasquez explained when the images were published. "There's clear cause and effect understanding in how she modifies the branch when it doesn't work as intended. That suggests conceptual thinking, the ability to visualize a solution before achieving it." Universities that had once considered bear behavior a thoroughly researched and understood field now established specialized research programs dedicated to ursine cognition. Graduate students competed for limited positions in these groundbreaking programs, eager to contribute to a field experiencing a renaissance of discovery. Dr. Vasquez, now leading the expanded Predator Cognition Department at Northridge Wildlife Research Center, developed innovative research methodologies specifically designed to detect and document decision-making behaviors in wild bears. Her team deployed advanced camera systems in bear habitats across North America, equipped with movement sensors and high-definition capabilities. 15 months after the encounter, the research team's efforts had yielded a catalogue of over 300 documented examples of bears exhibiting behaviors suggesting complex cognition, problem-solving, tool use, social cooperation, and apparent planning for future needs. Most compelling was the growing evidence of bears demonstrating different behaviors toward humans based on contextual assessment rather than pure instinct. Multiple documented cases showed bears distinguishing between threatening and non-threatening human activities, adjusting their responses accordingly rather than defaulting to either aggression or flight. The scientific ripples spread beyond wildlife biology into broader fields of animal cognition research. Neurologists began re-examining bear brain structure, identifying neural pathways potentially capable of supporting the observed cognitive abilities. Comparative cognition researchers started including bears in studies previously limited to recognized intelligent species like primates, cetaceans, and corvids. As understanding of bear cognition expanded, legal frameworks governing wildlife protection evolved to reflect this new knowledge. Conservation organizations successfully lobbied for enhanced protections based on bears' newly recognized cognitive capacities. The argument was compelling. If these animals possessed the ability to make complex decisions and potentially experience emotional states, ethical considerations demanded stronger protections. 17 months after Mike's encounter in the blizzard, Montana became the first state to pass what would become known as a cognitive recognition statute, establishing enhanced legal protections for bears based on their demonstrated intelligence. The statute increased penalties for poaching, expanded habitat protections, and established more stringent requirements for mitigation when human development impacted bear territories. Other states with significant bear populations followed suit, creating a patchwork of enhanced protections that would eventually lead to federal-level policy changes. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service established a task force specifically focused on incorporating cognitive research into conservation planning for all large predator species. International conservation efforts experienced similar transformations. At the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, CITES, meeting in Geneva, delegates cited the growing body of bear cognition research when voting to increase protection levels for several Urside species. The convention adopted language acknowledging emerging evidence of complex cognitive capacities as relevant to conservation priority assessments. Public attitudes toward bears underwent a remarkable evolution as awareness of their cognitive abilities spread beyond scientific circles. Communities that had once supported aggressive bear management now became advocates for coexistence strategies. Educational programs in schools near bear habitats began teaching children about bear intelligence and decision-making, creating a new generation with a fundamentally different understanding of these animals. Tourism practices in national parks transformed as visitors began viewing bears through a lens of respect for their intelligence rather than mere curiosity or fear. Park rangers reported visitors asking sophisticated questions about bear cognition and behavior, demonstrating a level of interest and understanding previously uncommon. 5 years ago, the questions were always about how dangerous bears are or what to do if attacked, explained Ranger Cooper during an interview at Yellowstone's Visitor Center. Now, people want to know about their problem-solving abilities, their social structures, how they make decisions. It's a completely different conversation. 20 months after the encounter, Mike and Dr. Vasquez collaborated on a comprehensive book titled The Thinking Bear: Recognizing Intelligence in America's Largest Predators. The book combined Mike's extraordinary photography with Dr. Vasquez's scientific expertise, presenting the growing body of evidence for bear cognition in accessible language for non-scientific readers. The book became an unexpected bestseller, further spreading awareness of bear cognitive abilities beyond academic circles. Schools incorporated chapters into science curricula. Conservation organizations distributed copies to policymakers. The public response reflected a profound shift in perception. People were eager to understand these animals they had previously viewed primarily as threats or simplified wildlife symbols. What we're witnessing isn't just a change in scientific understanding, Dr. Vasquez noted during a book promotional interview. It's a fundamental shift in how humans perceive our relationship with these remarkable animals. We're moving from fear-based management to respect-based coexistence. As the second anniversary of the blizzard encounter approached, Mike returned to Evergreen National Forest with a small documentary crew. The resulting film, The Sophia Effect, chronicled both the original encounter and its far-reaching implications for science and conservation. The documentary featured interviews with researchers, wildlife managers, and policymakers whose work had been transformed by the new understanding of bear cognition. It included stunning new footage of bears demonstrating problem-solving abilities, tool use, and social behaviors that defied traditional scientific understanding. Most poignantly, it included several minutes of recent footage showing Sophia and her now juvenile cub, filmed during the research team's ongoing observation program. The young bear had grown into a healthy subadult, displaying remarkable problem-solving abilities that researchers speculated might have been influenced by observing its mother's exceptional behaviors. Whether these cognitive abilities are learned or innate remains an open question, Dr. Vasquez explained in the documentary's closing segment. But what's undeniable is that we've overlooked a level of intelligence that was always there. It took one extraordinary encounter during a blizzard to open our eyes to what these remarkable animals are truly capable of. The documentary, like the encounter that inspired it, transformed how millions of viewers perceived bears and other large predators. It presented compelling evidence that humans shared their world with non-human minds capable of complex thought, minds that had been dismissed or misunderstood throughout scientific history. As the film concluded with footage of Sophia teaching her growing cub sophisticated foraging techniques, the narrator, Mike himself, offered a reflection that captured the profound shift in understanding that had occurred in the 2 years since. That desperate moment in the snow. We've always asked whether animals can think like humans. Perhaps that was the wrong question. The revelation isn't that bears think like us. It's that they think in their own complex ways, shaped by their unique evolutionary history and needs. The true discovery isn't bear cognition itself. It's our newfound ability to recognize intelligence different from our own. 5 years after that fateful encounter in the blizzard, Mike Donovan stood at the podium of the International Wildlife Conservation Summit in Geneva, Switzerland. The massive auditorium was filled to capacity with researchers, conservationists and policymakers from 63 countries. Outside, a light snow fell, a fitting reminder of how this journey began half a decade earlier. When I first heard that bear cub crying in the Montana wilderness, Mike began, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of everything that had unfolded since. I was just trying to survive a blizzard. I never imagined that moment would transform our understanding of wildlife cognition or reshape conservation policies worldwide. The audience sat in rapt attention. Many of them had built careers on the revolutionary research that emerged from that single encounter. The Sophia protocols, named after the remarkable mother bear, had become standard practice in wildlife management across North America, Europe, and parts of Asia. 5 years ago, we thought we understood bear behavior, Mike continued, advancing. His presentation to show side-by-side images of wildlife management manuals before and after what had become known as the cognitive revolution. We described them as instinct-driven animals with predictable responses to stimuli. We were wrong, profoundly wrong. As Mike spoke, screens behind him displayed footage from the global research initiative that had grown from his original documentation. Bears using tools to access food sources. Bears adjusting their behavior based on complex assessment of human intentions. Bears teaching specific skills to their young through what could only be described as intentional demonstration. What began with Sophia has expanded into the most comprehensive reassessment of animal cognition in scientific history, Mike explained, gesturing to the latest research statistics displayed on screen. In the past 5 years, we've documented over 3,000 examples of complex decision-making in bears alone. Similar research with wolves, big cats, and cetaceans suggests this cognitive capacity extends across numerous species previously underestimated by science. Dr. Elena Vasquez joined Mike on stage for the technical portion of the presentation. Now heading the International Predator Cognition Institute, a research organization that hadn't existed 5 years earlier, she had become the leading authority on animal intelligence assessment methodologies. The cognitive revolution hasn't just changed what we know, Dr. Vasquez explained to the assembled experts. It's transformed how we learn. We've developed entirely new research frameworks designed to detect and document animal intelligence without anthropomorphic bias. These methodologies have revealed cognitive capacities that were always present but invisible to our previous approaches. The presentation included highlights from the Cognitive Mapping Initiative, a global research program that had documented evidence of complex thinking across previously understudied species. What had begun with one bear in a Montana blizzard had expanded into a fundamental reassessment of how humans understood animal minds. As the presentation concluded, Mike shared recent footage of Sophia and her now adult offspring, captured by the long-term monitoring program established in Evergreen National Forest. The young bear, now fully independent, displayed problem-solving abilities that researchers described as exceptional even within the new understanding of bear cognition. Whether these abilities are inherited, learned, or some combination remains an ongoing research question, Mike explained as the footage played. But what's undeniable is that these animals think, learn, and make decisions in ways far more sophisticated than we previously believed possible. The scientific revolution sparked by Mike's encounter had expanded far beyond wildlife biology. The implications had influenced fields as diverse as neuroscience, artificial intelligence, conservation law, and even philosophy. Understanding animal cognition had become one of the most dynamic areas of scientific inquiry, attracting researchers from disparate disciplines. Dr. Landon Myers, director of the Neuroscience Research Initiative at Stanford University, took the stage to explain how bear cognition studies had transformed understanding of brain evolution. His team had been studying neural architecture across species, identifying previously unrecognized patterns in how different evolutionary paths had produced similar cognitive capacities. The old model of a linear progression from primitive to advanced cognition has been thoroughly disproven, Dr. Myers explained, displaying comparative brain imaging studies. What we're seeing instead is multiple evolutionary pathways to complex thinking, each shaped by different environmental pressures and survival needs. This revolution in understanding had profound implications for conservation practices worldwide. Dr. Thomas Hayes, now serving as the United Nations Special Envoy for Predator Conservation, presented the policy implications of the cognitive revolution. 5 years ago, conservation priorities were determined primarily by population numbers and genetic diversity, Hayes explained, reviewing the transformation in international protocols. Today, we recognize cognitive capacity as a critical factor in establishing protection frameworks. Species demonstrating complex decision-making abilities receive enhanced conservation consideration under international agreements ratified by 117 nations. The most significant policy development was the International Cognitive Recognition Accord, a groundbreaking multilateral agreement establishing protection standards based on demonstrated intelligence rather than traditional conservation metrics alone. The accord, ratified by a majority of UN member states, explicitly acknowledged the ethical dimensions of protecting species capable of complex thought. The cognitive revolution hasn't just changed scientific understanding, Hayes noted. It's transformed the ethical framework for how humans interact with other intelligent species with whom we share this planet. As significant as the scientific and policy changes had been, perhaps the most profound transformation had occurred in public perception. Wildlife conservation organizations reported unprecedented increases in public support and engagement. Educational programs about animal intelligence had become standard in school curricula worldwide. Tourism practices in wildlife areas had transformed as visitors sought more respectful, less intrusive ways to observe animals they now recognized as thinking beings rather than just photographic subjects. Parks and wildlife preserves had developed new visitor guidelines emphasizing respect for animal decision-making and autonomy. People relate differently to animals they recognize as thinking beings, explained Dr. Sophia Williams, Director of Public Education at the Global Wildlife Trust. We've seen a fundamental shift in how people perceive their relationship with wildlife, from seeing animals as resources or attractions to recognizing them as intelligent co-inhabitants of our shared ecosystems. This shift in perception had translated into tangible conservation outcomes. Poaching rates for bears and other recognized intelligent species had declined significantly in regions implementing cognitive awareness campaigns. Public support for habitat protection had reached unprecedented levels. Corporate investment in wildlife-friendly practices had increased as consumers demanded ethical standards that included respect for animal cognition. The most dramatic transformation had occurred in regions where humans and large predators shared territories. Communities that had once supported aggressive predator control now implemented sophisticated coexistence strategies based on understanding animal decision-making processes. The town of Pine Valley, just outside Evergreen National Forest, had become a model for this new approach. Once known for frequent bear conflicts resulting in animal deaths, the community had implemented the comprehensive Intelligent Coexistence Initiative. The program included specialized training for residents, modified waste management systems designed with bear cognition in mind, and community education focused on understanding bear behavior as the product of intelligent assessment rather than instinct. We used to see bears as problems to be managed, explained Pine Valley Mayor Rebecca Collins during a documentary interview featured in the summit presentation. Now we understand them as thinking neighbors with whom we need to communicate clearly and consistently. Once we started respecting their intelligence, conflict rates dropped by 87%. Similar transformations had occurred in communities worldwide, from northern Japan to Romania's Carpathian Mountains. The recognition of animal cognition had created a new framework for human-wildlife relationships based on mutual accommodation rather than dominance. As the policy portion of the summit concluded, Mike returned to the podium for his closing remarks. The journey that had begun with a desperate moment in a blizzard had transformed not just his life, but the lives of countless people and animals worldwide. 5 years ago, a mother bear made a decision that challenged everything we thought we knew about animal minds, Mike said, his voice reflecting the emotion of the moment. She assessed a human's intentions, overrode her protective instincts, and cooperated in saving her cub's life. In doing so, she opened our eyes to a world of animal intelligence that had always existed all around us, unseen because we weren't looking for it. The impact extended far beyond science and conservation. The cognitive revolution had influenced fields as diverse as artificial intelligence, where researchers now studied animal problem-solving for insights into non-human intelligence models, ethics, where philosophers grappled with the moral implications of recognizing complex thought in non-human species, and even theology, where religious thinkers reconsidered traditional views on the uniqueness of human consciousness. The most profound change hasn't been in what we know, Mike continued, but in how we see ourselves in relation to other thinking beings with whom we share this planet. We've moved from viewing ourselves as separate from and superior to nature toward recognizing ourselves as part of a complex community of minds, each evolved to meet different needs, but all capable of thought, choice, and intention. As the summit continued into specialized breakout sessions, Mike found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past 5 years. From wildlife photographer to reluctant revolutionary, he had witnessed a transformation in human understanding that few get to experience in a lifetime. Dr. Vasquez joined him on a balcony overlooking Lake Geneva, where they watched snow falling gently on the water. Did you ever imagine, when you were trudging through that blizzard, that you were walking toward a moment that would change how humans see their place in the natural world? She asked. Mike shook his head. I was just trying to survive. Then I heard that cub crying and everything changed. He paused, watching the snow. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd followed standard wildlife protocols, kept my distance, let nature take its course. The cub would have died, Dr. Vasquez said simply, and we would have continued misunderstanding these remarkable animals for who knows how long. Sophia knew what she was doing, Mike said after a moment. I've become more convinced of that. With every new discovery about bear cognition, she assessed the situation, recognized I was trying to help, and made a conscious decision to trust a human with her cub's life. That wasn't instinct or coincidence. No, Dr. Vasquez agreed. That was thinking, real thinking. We just needed someone to help us see it. 7 years after the encounter in the blizzard, Mike returned to Evergreen National Forest in winter. This time, he wasn't alone. A team of young researchers accompanied him, part of the long-term cognition observation program established to document wildlife intelligence across generations. The forest had changed little, still vast and pristine, though now protected by enhanced conservation designations, acknowledging its importance as habitat for cognitively complex species. What had changed was how humans moved through it, with greater awareness, respect, and humility toward the thinking beings whose home they entered. The research team established their observation camp near where Mike had first encountered Sophia and her cub. Advanced technology allowed them to monitor wildlife behavior with minimal disruption. Passive sensors, long-range imaging, and environmental DNA sampling provided data without interfering with the animal's natural behaviors. On their third morning, as dawn broke over the snow-covered landscape, the team's sensors detected bear movement approximately half a mile from camp. Using their specialized equipment, they observed a remarkable scene unfolding among the pines. A mother black, a bear, not Sophia but perhaps one of her descendants, was teaching 2 cubs how to access hibernation preparations. With deliberate movements that researchers now recognized as intentional demonstration, She showed them how to dig specific types of roots, which berries to select, and how to create food caches that would supplement their hibernation if needed. 7 years ago, we would have seen this as instinctive behavior, noted Olivia Chen, now leading her own research team after years working with Dr. Vasquez. Today, we recognize the teaching methodology, the intentional repetition, the assessment of comprehension. She's not just doing, she's instructing. As the team documented the behavior, Mike felt profound gratitude for how that desperate moment, in a blizzard, had transformed understanding of the natural world. The mother bear wasn't just passing on survival techniques, she was transferring knowledge accumulated through experience and assessment, the very definition of teaching. Later that afternoon, the research team gathered in their heated tent to review the day's observations. 7 years of focused research into animal cognition had produced a wealth of knowledge unimaginable before the paradigm shift. We've documented over 5,000 distinct examples of complex decision-making in bears alone, Olivia explained as they reviewed their findings. Evidence of tool use, causal reasoning, emotional processing, teaching methodologies, even rudimentary, cultural transmission of learned behaviors. The most surprising discoveries had come from neurological research. Advanced, non-invasive brain imaging technologies had revealed neural structures in bears similar to those associated with executive function in primates, regions responsible for planning, assessment, and decision-making rather than purely instinctive responses. The brain architecture is different from ours, evolved for different needs and environments, Olivia continued, but the functional capacity for complex thought is undeniably present. Different path, similar destination. This understanding had expanded to other species as well. Research inspired by the bear cognition discoveries had identified complex thinking in species previously considered relatively simple. From corvids demonstrating causal reasoning to coyotes showing evidence of mental time travel through planning for future conditions. The cognitive revolution had fundamentally altered humanity's perception of its place in the natural world. The old paradigm of human exceptionalism, the belief that complex thought was unique to Homo sapiens, had given way to recognition of a spectrum of intelligence across species, each evolved to meet different needs, but all capable of genuine thinking. This shift in understanding had profound practical implications. Conservation practices worldwide now incorporated cognitive assessment in determining protection priorities. Development projects required cognitive impact studies before approval in areas with intelligent species populations. Wildlife management had evolved from control to coexistence, acknowledging the agency and decision-making capacity of the animals involved. Perhaps most significantly, public attitudes had transformed. Children now grew up learning about animal intelligence as established fact rather than anthropomorphic fantasy. Media representations of wildlife emphasized cognitive capacity rather than simple instinct-driven behavior. The perspective that had once been considered fringe science had become mainstream understanding. 10 years after the blizzard encounter, Mike stood in the newly established International Center for Cognitive Research, reviewing the comprehensive timeline display chronicling the decade of revolutionary discovery that had followed that single moment in the snow. The center, built on the edge of Evergreen National Forest, served as both research facility and educational institution, drawing visitors and scholars from around the world. Its location had been carefully chosen to honor where the cognitive revolution began, in the snowy wilderness where a mother bear made a decision that changed scientific history. The main exhibition hall featured a life-sized recreation of the encounter, based on Mike's footage and detailed recollections. Visitors could witness the moment when Sophia assessed Mike's intentions and made the conscious decision to allow him to help her cub. the moment that opened human eyes to intelligence that had always existed around them. 10 years, Mike murmured, studying the timeline that covered an entire wall of the center. Each major discovery, each paradigm shift in understanding, each policy transformation, all traced back to that single encounter. Dr. Vasquez joined him, now silver-haired but still actively directing international research initiatives. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if anyone else had encountered that bear and cub, she said. Most would have kept their distance or fled. Some might have killed the mother out of fear. It took someone with your background to recognize something extraordinary was happening. Mike shook his head. I just documented what happened. The extraordinary part was Sophia's decision. She's the one who changed everything. The legacy of that decision continued expanding with each passing year. Universities worldwide now offered specialized degrees in comparative cognition. Conservation laws had evolved to incorporate cognitive capacity as a factor in protection determinations. Children learned about animal intelligence as fundamental scientific knowledge rather than speculative theory. Most importantly, humans had begun approaching their relationship with other species with greater humility and awareness. The recognition that human intelligence represented just one evolutionary path to complex thought, different from but not inherently superior to other forms of cognition, had profound implications for how people perceived their place in the natural world. This transformation wasn't limited to scientists and conservationists. Public attitudes had shifted dramatically. Surveys showed overwhelming support for conservation initiatives protecting cognitively complex species. Tourism practices had evolved toward respectful observation rather than entertainment or exploitation. Communities near wildlife habitats had developed sophisticated coexistence strategies based on understanding animal decision-making. The scientific ramifications extended far beyond wildlife biology. Artificial intelligence researchers studied animal cognition for insights into non-human intelligence models. Neurologists examined comparative brain structures to understand multiple evolutionary pathways to complex thought. Philosophers grappled with the ethical implications of recognizing intelligence across species boundaries. The most meaningful change, Dr. Vasquez noted as they toured the center's research facilities, has been in how humans see their relationship with other thinking beings. We've moved from viewing ourselves as separate from and dominant over nature toward recognizing ourselves as part of a community of minds, each with different capacities, but all deserving of moral consideration. The center's educational programs reflected this new understanding, teaching visitors about the spectrum of cognition across species without artificial hierarchies placing human intelligence at a presumed pinnacle. The approach emphasized different evolutionary adaptations, creating different types of intelligence, each suited to specific environmental challenges rather than representing steps on a linear progression. As Mike concluded his visit to the center, he spent time in the observation area, overlooking the forest where Sophia had once made her momentous decision. Advanced sensors and long-range imaging equipment allowed visitors to observe wildlife without disturbance, providing glimpses into the complex lives and behaviors of the forest's inhabitants. A group of schoolchildren gathered excitedly at one observation station, where monitors showed a black bear demonstrating tool use to access a food source, using a broken branch to extract insects from a fallen log with remarkable precision. "Is that Sophia?" one child asked eagerly. The naturalist guiding the group smiled. "No, Sophia would be quite elderly now if she's still alive. This is likely one of her descendants. We've documented similar cognitive behaviors through several generations in this forest. How do they learn to do that?" Another child asked, watching the bear methodically modify its tool when initial attempts proved unsuccessful. That's the question that transformed our understanding of wildlife, the naturalist explained. Some behaviors are instinctive, but many, like this tool modification, appear to involve genuine learning, problem-solving, and even teaching between generations. Before the cognitive revolution, we underestimated how much thinking happens in these remarkable minds. Mike watched the children's fascinated responses, seeing in their engagement a world fundamentally different from the one he had known growing up. A world where human exceptionalism had given way to recognition of diverse intelligences, where children learned from their earliest years about the thinking capacities of their non-human neighbors. That evening, Mike joined researchers from the Center for dinner in Pine Valley, the town that had transformed from a site of frequent bear conflicts to a model for cognitive-aware coexistence. The community had embraced its identity as a pioneer in human-wildlife relations, developing innovative approaches based on understanding bear decision-making rather than simply trying to control bear behavior. "We used to see bears as problems," explained Mayor Collins, who had overseen the community's transformation over the past decade. "Now we understand them as thinking neighbors with different needs and perspectives. Once we started respecting their intelligence and communicating consistently through our actions and systems, conflict rates plummeted." The town had redesigned everything from waste management to outdoor dining areas based on understanding how bears perceive and process information. Educational programs ensured residents understood bear cognition and decision-making patterns. The result was a community where humans and bears shared territory with minimal conflict, not through separation, but through mutual accommodation. As Mike prepared to leave the next morning, he took one final walk through the forest, where everything had changed a decade earlier. The air was crisp with early winter, not yet the deadly cold of the blizzard he had endured, but carrying hints of the season to come. Near a small clearing, he paused, recognizing the area where he had first heard the cubs' cries. Though the landscape had changed slightly over the years, trees grown taller, new undergrowth emerged, the essential character of the place remained. A soft sound drew his attention to the edge of the clearing. There, watching him with steady eyes, stood an elderly female black bear. Her muzzle showed the gray of advanced age, her movements the slight stiffness of arthritic joints. But her gaze remained clear, focused, and unmistakably intelligent. Mike remained absolutely still, making no move toward his camera. He knew better than to anthropomorphize, to project human meanings onto animal behavior. Yet as the bear held his gaze for a long moment, he couldn't help wondering if this could possibly be Sophia, the bear whose decision had transformed human understanding of animal cognition. After what seemed an eternity, the bear turned slowly, away, moving with unhurried dignity into the deeper forest. Mike made no attempt to follow. Some moments belonged to memory rather than documentation. Whether it was Sophia or another elderly bear made little difference in the end. The legacy of that blizzard encounter lived on, not just in scientific papers, conservation policies, and educational programs, but in a fundamentally transformed relationship between humans and the thinking beings with whom they shared the planet. As Mike returned to the research center, he reflected on how a single moment of connection across species boundaries had rippled outward, challenging assumptions, transforming understanding, and ultimately creating a world where humans approached their relationship with other thinking beings with greater humility, awareness, and respect. The cognitive revolution hadn't just changed what humans knew about bears and other intelligent species. It had transformed how humans perceived their place in the natural world, not as separate from or superior to nature, but as part of a complex community of minds, each evolved to meet different needs, but all capable of thought, choice, and intention. 10 years after that desperate moment in a Montana blizzard, The world had changed in ways that would have seemed impossible before a mother bear made a decision that defied everything science thought it knew. The full implications of that revolution continued unfolding, creating a future where humans and other thinking beings might share the planet with greater understanding and mutual respect than ever before imagined. As winter settled once again over Evergreen National Forest, the legacy of that extraordinary encounter lived on, in scientific understanding, in conservation practices, in human perceptions, and in the forest itself, where bears continued making complex decisions that would have once seemed impossible, but now revealed the thinking minds that had always existed, if only humans had known how to see them. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.